So we typically allow just about anything to control us typically. And a lot of times we think that we're in control of stuff, like we feel like we're handling things the way that we need to, but a lot of times we're actually just handing our control to all other types of things. Whether that's other people, whether that's our circumstances, whether that's who we think should be in office in some sort of office, whether that's some sort of thing that we think needs to happen in the world. Like a lot of times we feel like we're in control of it, but a lot of times we're actually handing that control over to those things. And those things can actually dictate our lives. It can influence our emotions. It can influence how we respond to certain things. And so what I want to talk about tonight is, what is this idea of self-control? And when I was a kid, there were like some ways that I thought about it that were like a piece of the puzzle, but it like wasn't quite the whole thing. And one of the things I thought was like, okay, self-control means like I ate 2 Oreos instead of like the 10 that I really wanted to eat. Or like, well, I watched 1 episode of a show instead of sitting down and watching the whole entire thing like I really wanted to. Like I really had some self-control. Which like that is technically self-control, but there's actually a broader definition of what that really means. And having self-control is really being able to have control over yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually. You have control regardless of the circumstances that you're in. So if we look at it that way, we go, oh, there's actually some other things that maybe I don't quite have self-control in. Because if someone comes at me and they say something that offends me, I don't have control. I fly off the handle and I yell back at them. Or I get cut off in traffic and it immediately causes me to do things that are out of my normal character. Those are things that show that I actually don't have control, but that those things are actually controlling me. There's a verse in Proverbs that says, a man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. Have you ever felt like that before? I know I felt like that before. Man, I feel like I'm just completely vulnerable to all of the things that are happening around me. Like I'm not controlling any of it. It's all just hitting me, and I feel like I have no defense. I have no protection. So what I want to look at tonight is, man, how did Jesus show that he had self-control? And again, not just like a limited view of self-control of like, oh man, like he didn't, I don't know, maybe like eat too much, or like not just things like that, but that he actually had control of his emotions in some really like high intensity moments. But instead of just like going through the stories and reading them off, I want us to put ourselves in the shoes of the disciples. So I want you to picture you're a disciple of Jesus, you're a follower of Jesus, and that Jesus is your rabbi. So as Jesus is your rabbi, it means you follow him around, you see how he lives his life, the way that he treats his family, the way that maybe his work ethic, but you're also learning from him, like, how does he pray? How does he worship? What does he do in his relationship with God? So these disciples, they were followers of Jesus, and they were following around and learning, okay, what are some things I can get from him? And what I'm sure they learned really early on is that this is like one of the most self-controlled people I've ever seen. Like there's all these different things that are coming at him, and he always has such a good response to them. So I want us to picture as we go through this, that we're the disciples, we're watching Jesus doing this, and we're thinking, okay, what can I learn from this? Because that's what they were constantly doing. What can I learn? What can I learn? And we're going to try and learn some tactics of self-control from Jesus. So I want you to imagine that you're sitting in a synagogue, which is basically like a church. You're sitting there, Jesus is going through and he's teaching you some scriptures and stuff, and all of a sudden these people come busting through the back door, and you realize it's the Pharisees, which was some of the religious leaders of the time, and that they're dragging in this woman and they throw her down in front of Jesus, okay? You're sitting there, you're learning, you're not expecting this at all. Boom, now this is happening, and then this is what they say. They say, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of committing adultery. And in the law of Moses, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" So basically what these Pharisees were trying to do is they were trying to trick Jesus. They're saying like, oh yes, we finally figured it out. He's not going to know what to say. He's going to say that we should have grace with her and not stone her. But then if he says that, then he's really contradicting the stuff that he's actually been teaching. And so like, yes, we finally got him. And in this moment, when these people are trying to trick him, it says that he just went and he knelt down and he started like drawing on the ground like this with his finger. He was completely controlled even when these people were trying to attack him. So then here's what he says. He says, the one that's without sin among you should be the first one to stone her. And then he stooped down again and he continued writing on the ground. And when they heard this, they left one by one, starting with the older men. Only he was left with the woman in the center. And when Jesus stood up, he said to her, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? No one, Lord, she said. Neither do I condemn you, said Jesus. Now go, and from now on, do not sin anymore. I mean, I'm just trying to imagine, like, if I was sitting in the room, if I was in Jesus' shoes, I would have wanted to, like, go right back at them, especially if I knew they were trying to trick me. But that he was so controlled, even in the face of these people trying to really accuse him, that he was just able to just sit and draw on the ground, and that he was completely relaxed and controlled. So the first thing that we would learn from that is that he was calm in controversy. Even when all of these people were trying to accuse him, he was still able to keep calm. So when we see a post on social media and it's something that we disagree with, are we able to keep calm in the midst of a controversy? If we're arguing with a friend or a spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, and we feel like they're not being fair, they're not listening to me, like, can we stay calm in controversy? That's the first thing that we learn from Jesus, is that no matter what type of controversy there was, he was able to keep control of his emotions. And then after that, they're walking, and he says, okay, let's go ahead and cross over to the other side of the water. So they start to cross over, and right as they do, a storm starts to come in. A storm is rolling in, the waves are crashing up against the boat starts to fill up with water, and the disciples are panicking. They're like, okay, they're trying to save it, they're trying to get through all this stuff, and then they realize, wait, where's Jesus? And Jesus is asleep on the other side of the boat. He's asleep in the midst of this storm. So then they go to him and they say, teacher, do you not care that we're about to perish? And he awoke and he rebuked the wind and the sea and said, peace, be still. And the wind ceased and there was a great calm. He said to them, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? Again, they're in the midst of all of this chaos and it seems like he just has this calm. But what we can learn from this is that you have two options in the midst of chaos. You can either be a thermometer or you can be a thermostat. If I don't have self-control, then I'm going to be a thermometer. It means I'm going to match the temperature of whatever is happening in the room. If all of a sudden the room gets really hot, I'm going to get really hot. If stuff gets really cold, I'm going to get really cold. That's what happens when we don't have self-control. When I'm a thermostat, it means I actually set the temperature of the room. Regardless of what's happening in the room, I set the temperature. And we see that Jesus did this. Not only was he just calming the wind and the waves, but he was actually telling the wind and the waves to match his inner peace. He's calling it to peace because he's saying, I'm at peace, now you're at peace. And that we actually have the ability to do the same thing. And that regardless of the physical things that are going around us, we can have peace in pandemonium when things are all going wild. Maybe we get a new diagnosis, we go through a divorce, we lose a child, we have all of these different things that can happen, a breakup, all these different things. It doesn't mean they're not hard, but that we're able to go into those scenarios and say, you know what, I'm not going to let these get me flustered. I'm going to be a thermostat, and I'm going to change the temperature of the room. Now, what I've done in the past with this is I've turned and said, okay, if I'm going to have peace, it means I'm just going to suppress everything. So then if like something hard happens, I'm just going to go, nope, I'm just going to push those feelings down, and I'm going to act like they're not there. That has like ruined most of my life doing that. So please don't hear me saying that if something hard happens that you're not supposed to feel anything. Because even when Jesus' friend Lazarus died, and he knew that he was going to raise him from the dead, he didn't walk up to him and go, "What are you guys so sad about?" and go and raise him from the dead. He actually went and he mourned with the family first. So it's not that you don't feel emotions. It's not that you don't feel sadness or anger or any of these things when hard circumstances around us are happening. But it's that we're able to say, you know what, I'm going to be able to feel these emotions under control. And that's what we see Jesus do when he was grieving with Lazarus. That's what we see him in these moments. He was able to express his emotions under control. They did not control him. And then he goes to the cross. He goes to the cross and he dies for the sins of the world. But as he's on his way, he's getting beaten and spit on. I mean, they're saying terrible things about him. They put him and nail him on a cross. And then what's the next thing that he says? This has to be one of the most self-controlled moments in history. He says, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they do." In the midst of all of the people that he's looking at, they're the ones that tortured him and put him on a cross. And he was still able to look at them and say, you know what, but I still see the image of God in them, and I still want what's best for them. That when he had the power to call down thousands of angels to just obliterate the city and knock them all out, he was able to stay controlled in that moment. So that what we see is that he was objective in oppression. Even when he was being oppressed, he was still able to be objective and see the image of God in people and say, you know what, I still want what's best for you. So then when we're wrongly accused of something, we really didn't do it and someone's still accusing us of something, or when someone is being rude to us and we didn't do anything to deserve it, we haven't said anything, and they just come in and start talking crazy. Or if a spouse, boyfriend, or girlfriend, you feel like they accuse you of something that you didn't do or that you didn't have that intention of. Can we go into those moments and not try and talk over people and get our point across? Or can we go into those situations and not get super hot again and get really angry with people? But can we stay objective even when we're being mistreated and say, you know what, I still care about you and I'm still going to choose to do what's best for you, even though this isn't just. So these are the types of things that people were learning while they were disciples of Jesus while he was alive. So they would have learned all these things, and they'd have been keeping a record of them in their mind and gone, okay, this is how he responds in this situation. This is how he responds. They're trying to memorize it. At the time, they really didn't write a whole lot down, but they were memorizing some of the things that he did. And then after he raises back from the dead, all of his disciples are like, yes, okay, we got 3 years with you at first, but now that you're alive again, we're going to be able to learn some more stuff from you now that you're back. And he says, you know what, actually, I'm going to go back to the Father. I'm going to go back to heaven. And they're like, what? We still have more that we want to learn from you. How do we get that? And he said, this is what he says when he's having this conversation. He says, nevertheless, I tell you the truth. It's to your advantage that I go away. For if I don't go away, the Helper won't come to you. But if I go, I will send him to you. And then in verse 13, he says this. He says, when the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you in all truth. For he will not speak on his own authority, but whatever he hears, he will speak. And he will declare to you the things that are to come. This is typical and sounds more normal sometimes to us, but this would have been so confusing to the people that he was saying it to initially. Because the only framework that they had is let me just learn a bunch of information and try to memorize it and see if I can do it. But Jesus is going, you know what, actually you don't have to do that. I'm actually going to send a helper that's going to inform you of what to do in every given situation. I'm going to send you a helper so that if you maybe didn't see me do something, you don't have to try and recall. I have this Holy Spirit that's able to show me what I'm supposed to do next. So that's what Jesus left us with. And I was trying to think, what is a good way to show how the Holy Spirit does this for us, and that it's not a thing that we're just like working really hard to get. And this is the thing I came up with. So I watched this movie on Netflix called Upgrade. Has anyone in here seen that? So this guy that gets in a car wreck and he gets paralyzed. He gets paralyzed, and there's these people that put a computer chip in his neck to where he can start to get use of his limbs and stuff again. So they put it in, and he's able to move and stuff. He's like, wow, this is amazing. And as time goes on, the computer chip starts to take over his body. And all of a sudden, he's like going and like killing people and stuff. But he's not doing it. The computer chip is like moving his arms and stuff, and it's making him do it. And eventually, once you get to the end of the movie, the computer chip has completely taken over the person. The person is gone, and it's just this computer chip that's working through the person. I watched that movie, and I was like, this is really depressing. Like, the movie ends, and it's like none of his, he like had killed all of his friends. Like, no one was left. It's just like him sitting in an empty room. And I was just like, wow, why did I watch that? That was a waste of time. And I was like, wait a second, that's actually, in a much more not killing way, what Jesus is trying to do as he's having the Holy Spirit live inside of us. That slowly, as we start to surrender control to him, he continually starts to take over and work through our body. And that Jesus knew that, you know what, I know it seems like it'd be good for me to stay, but it's actually better if I go, because I could potentially be living through millions and millions and millions of people all over the world. And that as you guys start to surrender, I am more and more able to work through you. So before you go home and go through all that list of the things that I said and go, okay, let me try harder to make sure that I'm objective when I'm being oppressed, and let me make sure I'm trying to have peace when things are hard. And like, before you go home and do that, just know that that does not lead to actual self-control. And I'm telling you from experience, because I've tried it for 27 years. Like, I've tried and tried and tried to work harder at these things and go, you know what, if I just try a little bit harder, I think I can get it. But that truth that what Jesus left with us at the end is that instead of trying harder to grasp some of the things that he did while he was alive, he's saying, use my life as an example. Like, look at my life and look at your life and go, does mine not look like his? And instead of, when I see a deficiency, instead of saying, oh, I'm going to try harder, I'm going, oh, that's a part of my life that I have not surrendered to the Holy Spirit yet. So when I see that, I'm not going to feel guilt and shame and, oh, I'm a terrible person. I'm going to look at it, I'm going to go, oh, okay, this is showing me a place in my heart that I have not let go of. So true self-control, the world will tell you that self-control is just being able to be really strong and nothing affects me. And true self-control is actually giving control to the Holy Spirit, and he becomes so much a part of who you are that now I myself have control because Jesus is in control of my life. So that's the question that I want you to ask whenever we start to go into some reflection time, is where are the places in my heart that I'm not allowing God to have control? And there's people even who would say like, oh yeah, like you can't make me angry, or like you can't make me sad. And there's some truth to that. But typically, if we get mad about something, it did make us mad because we gave control to it. Like if I say like, oh man, my brother, like he can't make me mad. But if I get mad at him, it's because I gave him control of my emotions. And when he did something that I didn't like, then it set me off. Or when I think, oh, you know what, like the people at my job, they can't affect me. But if something happens at my job that I don't like, and now all of a sudden I'm flipping out and doing things I wouldn't normally do, it did have control of me. So let's start to think about where are the places in my life where I've just freely handed control to other people or to other things, and how can I take that back and give it to God? And then as I start to do that, I can truly start to have self-control.